This time, Calais Racing Union, the incredible history of the Coupe de France.
And it's no, nay, never. No, nay, never, no more. 'Cause I'll stay a wild rover forever and more. And it's no, nay, never. No, nay, never, no more. 'Cause I'll stay a wild rover forever and more.
Hello and welcome to By Far the Greatest Team, a podcast in which football fans attempt the impossible to rank and put the greatest football teams in some kind of order and status in history. My name's Graham Dunn. I'm really going to struggle to get an Oxford United reference into a French football special. And joining me, as ever, a man who's as comfortable with spreadsheets as clean sheets. It's our very own data warrior, Jamie Rooney.
Do you know, you haven't picked up on it, or if you have, you haven't said anything, but I think I've made quite a lot of Manchester United references over the past few podcasts as well. I got away with it. But I think mine have generally been in context because United seem to pop up against the teams that we're talking about. Oldham Athletic, absolutely. Last week, you couldn't talk about that brilliant Oldham Athletic team without mentioning Manchester United. But a few other times it's got in there, and I seem to have got it in under the radar. And whilst I'm teasing you about Oxford United, there I am making Manchester United references every single opportunity.
It hasn't gone unnoticed. But I suppose you could argue that last week with Oldham Athletic, the FA Cup semi-final mention. There were two FA Cup semi-finals against Man United, were arguably more important than the Oldham home 4-1 victory over Oxford United that I did crowbar in. So I suppose yours were probably more justified. So that was, if you haven't heard that one, it's a great podcast. Last week we had Declan Clark on, helping us out, look at the great Joe Royle Oldham team. Okay, a few bits and pieces from that, actually. We did some. This is a good web Twitter site, OAFC, which is an Oldham Athletic Archive site, which they did coincidentally have an image of that Nick Henry goal, which had crossed the line against Man United, which I'd been struggling to actually find footage of. Now, I've been struggling to find footage of partly because I've been looking at the wrong game. In my mind, it had happened in the original semi-final, but Jamie, you pointed out it was actually the replay, wasn't it?
Yeah, and that explains why I was surprised to find footage of it straight away. Clearly, if you were looking at the wrong game. Yeah, I did. And it happens in the replay. So the first game is the Fridder on the unofficial Super Sunday where Crystal Palace beat Liverpool 4-3 in semi-final 1, and then Oldham come close to beating Manchester United in semi-final 2 and finishes 3-3. So they go to main road for the replay, and yeah, you're right, Oldham's shot looks to have hit the bar and bounced over the line, and the referee's in prime spot, but the referee almost has decided it's not a goal even before it's hit the turf. I think as it's coming down, he's almost waving on. Then he has to take a second glance, but at this point he's already waved on. But it looks like it's over the line, and if I was being used back in those days, then I think, or even goal line technology, which is a far better introduction of technology than VAR, which is having its problems right now for sure, especially in the English league. But yeah, it was a bona fide goal. But what surprised me the most was the Oldham Athletic players. They didn't take advantage of the opportunity. They didn't go away celebrating. They made it easy for the officials. They just kind of shrugged their shoulders, and maybe that was a side note of the honesty and integrity of this brilliant Oldham team. But I think in my mind, I would have been running away, celebrating, putting doubt in the officials that ball was definitely over the line.
Definitely so. And thanks also to OAFC and also Mal Wrinkle's Football Nostalgia, another excellent Twitter feed I would recommend following, who also managed to dig out the brilliant Oldham Athletic and Inspiral Carpets picture, which is really quite something. Unfortunately, the picture, I think, was taken at Boundary Park, which obviously made sense. They're both Oldham. I was hoping it had been, because it was taken ahead of the League Cup final. I was hoping it was going to be at Wembley, so I could make a joke of that being the last time the Baggies appeared at Wembley. But because it's quite a special picture, it's everything I was hoping for, and I think that Kenry probably carries it up pretty well. We're less convinced how committed to the cause Andy Ritchie and Frankie Bunn were. But it's a magic picture. On that, we also sort of quite memorably we mentioned Rick Holden's appearance on Question of Sport, and we were sort of covering a fair bit of ground there. So I didn't stop to continue the debate as to whether any other second tier footballer had ever appeared on Question of Sport. I've done a tiny bit of research. It's quite difficult to research. I suppose I'm sure somewhere exists a list of every guest who's ever appeared on Question of Sport. It'd be a bit depressing to look through, scour all of that. The only person I don't see any evidence he did appear, so I approached it from what other second tier footballer might have been in there, and I think the most famous second tier footballer in the 80s, I guess it was 80s probably, was Steve Bull of Wolves, who it feels to me, because obviously he played for England as a second tier footballer. I think there must have been a chance that Steve Bull was on Question of Sport.
I think you're right. I mean, that's a really good shout because he was in the 1990 World Cup squad as well as a second tier player. Wolves were in the second division then, and Steve Bull his fame kind of grew when Wolves were in the fourth division. They famously dropped from the top tier to the fourth tier in as many seasons, and then almost came back up to the second tier in as many seasons as well. But yeah, I think Steve was a brilliant shout, Graham. That's excellent. Yeah, I too struggled with the Question of Sport second tier footballers, but clearly I didn't come from the very smart angle that you did. I was trying to read every single guest has ever appeared on the Question of Sport since 1970, when they have around about 35 episodes every season as well. So that was a bit painful, and notably, I didn't conclude that bit of analysis.
Rightly so, clicking all the way through. The other reference you also referenced, which is very, very impressive, was the play that had been written about that season, appearing in the Oldham Apollo or some such venue.
That famous production company theatre.
And again, I was a bit sort of disappointed. I was going through my mind thinking about other football plays, and you named the one that immediately sprung to my mind, which is the Arthur Smith Evening with Gary Lineker one. But I'm sort of kicking myself because, of course, I missed that. I mean, there's one I think is still on in London at the moment, which is the Gareth Southgate James Graham play, which would have been the second mention of James Graham on this podcast, which would have been really quite impressive. But I missed that opportunity, but I've now not missed that opportunity, so I feel much better about myself.
Yeah, you know what, with Oldham as well, we talked about briefly Jimmy Frizzle, and I completely forgot to mention, we've talked about this previously, where he was the manager that tapped into that one time only, the Ford Sporting League, where Ford brought out this idea that the team with the least yellow and red cards would win a booty of £50,000 at the end of the season. And Jimmy Frizzle tapped into that, and he actually steered his Oldham team to win that. And that went on to build a new stand at Boundary Park. So Jimmy Frizzle is absolutely a legend in the Oldham area, I'd imagine, taking in a lot of that Oldham air.
The Oldham air, absolutely. But we're not staying in the northwest of England this week. We're taking another dive into French football. Bizarrely, we've had a few of these. There have been 2 or 3 fantastic stories, and this one is a story that was a bit too irresistible. It's another classic Underdogs story. We're going to be looking at Calais Racing Union. They are a proper amateur team, and I suppose the thing about them, we've had plenty of amateur or part-timers, and obviously it's quite apt with the FA Cup having just kicked off this weekend, the first round, which is when you start getting the league clubs involved with the great amateur teams, and this is where no commentator will miss the opportunity to bring in the profession of the part-time footballer who's and obviously they like it to be a postman, so they can make the postman delivers the final knockout blow or something like that. It's kind of that's the bread and butter of the football commentator of this FA Cup era. But in France and the Coupe de France, which is so we're going to focus initially on this absolutely incredible Calais story, which is an incredible story because they are a team of amateurs who reached the final in 2000. I mean, and that cup, in fact, has a whole series of romantic upsets around it, including, in fact, bizarrely, Calais themselves, who in 2006 reached the quarterfinals of that competition, equally as an amateur club. So in any other period of a club's history, going through 8 rounds and getting knocked out in the quarterfinals of the Premier Cup competition would be your greatest achievement. Except just 6-7 years earlier, Calais get to the final.
It is an incredible story, and we get lost for all of the right reasons in the romance of the FA Cup. And you're right, the FA Cup first round proper, as we like to call it, it's just kicked off this weekend. And I'm really impressed because, whilst we're focused on the romance of the cup competition in our neighbours across the pond across the channel, in France, you made a brilliant opportunity to talk about an absolute classic first round tie yesterday, where non-league Aldershot Town are 7-0 up against Swindon at Swindon, and you didn't even go there. I'm super impressed.
I was about to go there.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to steal the thunder.
I did this. No. That's no problem. The moment you mentioned, I saw your eyes light up on the first round proper, and I thought, I'm not going to mention Oxford this week, but I suppose I could mention another team, which is of interest. Yes, that I had to say, I can't. I mean, it would already be this, arguably the strangest football match, one of the strangest football matches ever. If you find yourself the away side 7-0 up after an hour, and the game then finishes 7-4. I mean, it's not often you score 4 goals and have still been roundly. I mean, they've basically scored 4 consolation goals. Now, that never happens in a game of football. But once you add in that it's a non-league side playing away from home, I mean, that is just a staggering result.
It is a staggering result, and it's the reason why we love the cup competitions, and the FA Cup has all of the romance, and come January we'll be reeling out all of the wonderful underdog stories that have happened down the years, and there's many of them. But you're right, in France, the Coupe de France, the French FA Cup, has, I think, as good, if not better, more of a romantic kind of connection. This is a very unique competition because not only is this competition open to teams on mainland France, it goes right down to the lowest tiers. There are 7. We love tiers on this competition. Just to give you some context, the FA Cup starts with around about 700 teams, approximately 700 to 800 teams, and that features teams in the 9th and 10th tier of the English football pyramid. The French FA Cup, the equivalent, features over 7,000 teams that go down to not only the 17th tier, the 17th tier in French football. It's also open to overseas territories. So countries like Mayotte, Guadeloupe, Réunion, Tahiti, countries that have some affiliation with the French mainland are allowed to enter the French Cup and have done since 1961-62.
That is genius. Now, Calais actually are quite an interesting side. I mean, they actually have some their kind of predecessor side, the initial Racing Club du Calais, actually have a bit of history about them, and were quite successful in the kind of 1920s, 30s, and even turn. The club actually has a few years where it turns professional. So the club itself has a tiny bit of pedigree, but that weirdly it's professional for about 5 years. I think it opts back into the amateur league in 1938. Obviously, quite a lot of stuff happening around then. Anyway, it's not until the 1970s The club is struggling away there, and in fact, there's the modern day version of, or actually not even the modern day version, the current, the version we're going to look at for this pod is formed together from a merger of local sides. So the Calais Racing Union. I'll go for Union. That sounds quite good, actually, doesn't it? Calais Racing Union is formed in 1974, but it's still, a proper amateur club, and it is way down the ladders of French league football. I can't quite fully establish. I think they might get a bye. They might be high enough that they don't play the first round. But they have still, I think, played 5 more games before Nantes, who they eventually play in the final, enter the competition. So winning 5 games is a pretty impressive achievement to make it, for this club, to make it to the first round proper.
Yeah, you're right. So in terms of a bit of background, so the French league football, for those who don't know, the pyramid, in France, there's 2 professional leagues. There's Ligue 1 and there's Ligue 2. After that, you have the National, which is the 3rd tier, and then you've got National 2, which is the 4th tier, and then you've got National 3, where it's regional. There are a number of different divisions, and they're all quite regional. And as we mentioned, the regional leagues go right down to 17, 18 tiers. It's quite incredible. So Calais, who we're talking about now, are kicking around in the 4th and 5th tier. So the equivalent would be in English football, I guess, a conference team or a conference north, conference south team in terms of where Calais are playing. And because of that, they are allowed to enter the French Cup at the 5th round stage, as it's called. The first few rounds is regional. It's generally played between the lower tier teams until the more lower non-league tier teams, if that makes sense, enter the tournament. But yeah, so you're spot on. I mean, just to give you some context, Nantes enter what they call the round of 64, which is the 9th round, and Calais enter at the 5th round. So Calais have already played, as you rightly said up, Graham, 4 games before they get to the same stage where Nantes enter the tournament.
Calais, I think one of the other things about this, and we've seen it with some of the other teams we've talked about, in fact, actually from the region they're in and the area they're in, that actually it's quite good timing. I mean, looking at this Calais story is like a memory trip down school trips to France, because you basically got all these areas which you only know from school trips, whether it's Boulogne or Dunkirk or these various places. So Calais itself was quite a depressed area at the time. It's quite interesting because Calais is, coming from the UK, everyone kind of has heard of and knows Calais because it's an obvious point to for the ferry to arrive in. But actually, without that, I'm not sure anyone would have any reason to even know Calais.
It's very true. I mean, there's probably endless people from Britain that have passed through Calais, but probably haven't stayed there for any longer than what they need to in terms of getting where they need to get to onto mainland Europe. It's one of those places where you go on a day trip to possibly stock up on cheap booze. Not so much these days. But my school trips when I was younger was a bit more upmarket. It was Boulogne down the coast. It wasn't Calais. Calais was
nice.
That kind of area where you would bypass. So you're right, Graham. You'd probably go to Boulogne in the south or Dunkirk in the north if you were having a day trip in France. You wouldn't go to Calais because it is and has been a quite depressed area.
So, and Boulogne actually is where Calais play their game against Cannes in the last 16, I think. The home ground, which is the Stade Julien Denis. I'm enjoying my French pronunciation today. And that has a capacity of 2,100, I think. So, again, that gives you the context of what level this club is at. And, throughout this cup run, once they start drawing bigger sides, that a number of home draws, but but none of them are played. They're mostly played outside of the home ground.
Which is quite unusual because are you familiar with the kind of wonderful quirk regulation in the French Cup? If you're drawn against a team that's 2 tiers higher than you in the French Cup, away from home, the fixture is reversed, so you can play the game at home, so you get a home advantage. And it probably explains a bit why lower tier teams do seem to get to the latter stages in the French Cup. It's not unusual. It's very unusual for a 4th tier team only once to get to a final, as we're talking about now. But it's not unusual for 4th tier teams to make the quarterfinals or the round of 32, and in some very rare cases, the semi-finals as well, because they have this little quirk where they can play their games at home.
That has been put forward as a suggestion in the FA Cup as a way of counterbalancing the loss of getting rid of replays. In fact, it hasn't appeared to happen as it turned out. I think that's the other thing that's quite interesting. Another part of this element is that there are no all the games are decided on the day, and this is. The season we're talking about is 1999-2000, so we are talking 20 odd years ago, and I think even then in English football you're still largely looking at replays for almost. I'm not quite sure when the penalties came in, even in the League Cup, but the replays were still very much in vogue there, and I think maybe there's always been a question about what the impact is of taking away those replays and the financial impact, and but it's quite interesting that arguably having those results decided on the day over a potential lottery of penalties perhaps increases the shock and upset potential as well.
Yeah, I think this is where French football was ahead of the times as well, because they in the French Cup they did away with replays as far back as the late 1960s, early 1970s. So they had replays in place up until then. They decided that replays was not the way to go, and as soon as the penalty kick was an option, which it was in the 1970s when the ruling was introduced, French football in the cup adopted it immediately. So replays in the French Cup really are a thing of the past. There hasn't been replays in the French Cup for over 50 years.
I guess the other thing with this side is that one of the things you often do is with the teams we talk about, as we then talk about some of the players, because they are either household names or are even with the lower level teams, as we discover, you might find there's somebody who wasn't a household name at the end but then becomes it, either because of what they go on to do or because whether that be even with Hereford, we managed to find a guy who went on to become the son of God. So, with David Icke. So, who knows who's in that squad. But
I think this is one of your favourite ever team sheets. You love a team sheet that kind of could be outlined in the way that and where you're driving this to.
Well, it's a fascinating squad, but there is no. There is no star quality in this side at all, is there?
No, I mean not even the coach. I mean the coach,
Ladislav Lozana.
Thank you. Yeah, so Ladislav Lozano, even the coach. I mean, this is his only real notable level of fame, and he's been managing for many years in multiple continents, not just Europe. I think he's Spanish born, but kind of living in France at the time. Goes on and manages in Africa as well. But yeah, I mean, this is the peak, I think, for the manager and the players. And maybe we're doing them a disservice, but yeah, you probably, like me, struggle to find any real research about the players in this particular team beyond this particular cup run.
Lozano is a really interesting sort of character, and I think he, from what I'd read about it, I think he was just kind of working for the council and the kind of sports department there, in almost in a similar realm to when we were talking about Dick Kerr-Ladies ages ago, where again it's sort of somebody whose job was just kind of sporting leisure person at the factory. That it's like stumbling into management and then then achieves this and goes on across, having played football in up to a little bit in Spain, but having kind of exiled himself to France.
Well, I mean, we've touched on the difficult conditions in Calais at this particular moment, and the players themselves weren't really earning anything from playing. They were funding their lifestyles through, just regular jobs, electricians, working on the Channel Tunnel, social workers, shopkeepers, that classic team sheet that you love, Graham. And they weren't getting paid a lot, if anything, for actually representing the football team on the weekends. So as they're going through this particular cup run and they're becoming the absolute heartbeat of French football, and Calais mania is kicking in, and everyone's loving and the whole romantic story, they're financially not gaining anything much from it, but obviously they've got that notoriety. So these are pretty, decent working class guys who like a game of football on the weekend and don't get paid much for it.
Yeah, Lozana was a council foreman responsible for tending for the city's sporting facilities. So he's kind of like almost like the leisure centre manager. He probably was, he's out there marking the marking the lines out. Maybe through this story, he has quite an incredible. He suffers a minor heart attack apparently after the semi-final, such as the shock, and is in hospital where he gets a call from President Jacques Chirac. This is incredible, and then goes on to manage in Algeria, in Qatar. It continues to do this stuff. So it is but exactly as you say, there's no. This is just this is proper amateur football.
So minus the heart attack, he's a bit of a Gordon Britis, and he's building his own British empire in the north of France.
It's very good.
That's very good. Not many people are going to get, I don't think.
The British Empire. Well, maybe we'll have Chris Barry will play him in the. We've had Dennis Waterman in the previous story. Maybe Chris Barry could play Lozana in this one. So this story really, they make it through until the first round proper. And the first round proper, this is where they start to play teams and that we've heard of fundamentally. So they play Lille, who are, I think they're second tier at the time, but they draw them at home, which they do play at their small home ground. Get a 1-1, and they go through on penalties on that one 7-6. They get quite lucky with their draw in the next round, where they draw a fifth tier side, I think, Langston Castellet or something like that, which they win quite comfortably. And then you're getting through to where you've essentially got 16 teams left. So this is kind of really the business end of it. And they end up playing Cannes. I'd have swapped that for an away. I've been to Cannes, and I would swap that for an away game. But if I'd have been them, but they choose to play that one at Boulogne. Cannes again, a second tier side, but still, several runs up the ladder from them. Again, that one finishes 1-1, goes to penalties, which Calais win 4-1. And I think you're right. All of this is impressive, but it's probably not unprecedented, especially in this tournament. At this point, everyone's thinking, well, this is great, brilliant. We got Calais in the quarterfinals of our Premier Cup competition, but it's all going to be some sort of normality will kick in at this stage. They draw Strasbourg in the quarterfinals, and I think this is the point at which the story steps up a level from just plucky underdogs to actually this is this is insane.
Yeah, so this is the first time they face a top tier football team. Strasbourg are in Ligue 1. They're around about mid table, so they're not challenging for the championship. They're kind of flirting more relegation, but it's still a team 4 divisions ahead of where Calais are, and this is more importantly a professional football team. This is a team where the guys are getting paid to do football as a job professionally, and it's at this point where you probably start thinking it's a nice run, it's a lovely story, a bit like Lincoln City in the FA Cup a few seasons ago. That non-league team getting to the quarterfinals, but that's the end of it, and no one really is expecting that the fairy tale, this emotional investment that we've got in Calais to this point, is going to continue into the semi-final, which would be the 13th round of the cup at that particular moment. But it doesn't work out that way.
No, absolutely. So they this time they switched the game to another relatively log. So they go to Lens this time, which has a much higher capacity, and basically, from what I can tell, the whole of Calais goes to this game. there's a good BBC report on this thing. I should credit Phil Dawkes. There's a very good article on that if you want to find out any more around it. And he's talking about 250 buses that had been hired to bring essentially Calais to Lens to watch this game. And so they're playing Strasbourg. Unbelievably, they go ahead and win. There's they win 2-1. They get a goal from a social worker and shopkeeper. I'm going to go with professions rather than their names. I think that's more fitting for for this. So social worker and shopkeeper get them an incredible 2-1 win. And at this point now, as you say, it has joined the national psyche, and people are talking about Calais mania, and you know, they are now in the semi-finals of the French Cup. They are playing. They draw Bordeaux. This game is again played at Lens. So again, I'm guessing home advantage option goes to Calais. But I mean, this Bordeaux side is. I mean, I think you could probably argue that Strasbourg side wasn't. Maybe not necessarily the strongest of the French teams in that, but this Bordeaux side has some actual as kind of internationals playing in that side, is some very established footballers, and I think at this point everyone thinks this is over. Calais take around 40,000 people to the game. It is absolutely swamped, and again, I don't think anyone thinks they are going to get a result out of this semi-final. I mean, Bordeaux looking like a proper. Christophe de Gary is playing for them. Legwinski, they do have some proper players. And another incredible thing on this. So they do win the game. They win 3-1. They win that. That is through, but that is in extra time, which I think is an absolutely extraordinary element to this that you are talking about. Because the one element you see in any kind of cup football is the difference, really fundamentally, between amateur and professional is the fitness, isn't it?
It is. And just to go back on your point, this is a proper Bordeaux team. This is a Bordeaux team that are challenging in the top spots of Ligue 1. They're looking to qualify for the Champions League. So they're really going up against a tidy, and you referenced Christophe Dugarry, but they've also got a pretty tidy player in Sylvain Wiltord playing for them as well, who goes on and has a pretty good career with Arsenal. I mean, as an equivalent in English football, a fourth tier team has never made the semi-finals of the FA Cup in its glorious history, and the FA Cup's been going since 1872. Never once, 150 odd years, never once has a fourth-tier team made it. Some may argue that Tottenham Hotspurs in 1900 as a non-league team won it, but even if that is true, they were still a third-tier team at that particular point, playing in the Southern League, which sat outside the top two divisions. So it's a remarkable achievement that they've got this far. They've gone into added time. You think the dream is over, and not only do they win it by a clear margin of 2 goals.
Now, I think there must be an element, and again, we sort of touched on this in the Leicester story, there must be an element where, this Bordeaux side are sort of starting to feel like, I mean, the whole country wants Calais to get there. It is extraordinary. There must have been an element of that somewhere there. As you mentioned previously, Lozano, the manager, suffers a mild heart attack, apparently, after this. He's certainly in hospital for 3 days. My favourite piece on this was that then they're treated as heroes. I think you talked about the money. I think they received. In a previous round, they got a bonus of the players got a bonus of 2,000 euros or each as part of this. A benefactor comes forward and gives them 10,000 euros. I mean, it's still relatively, which is incredible for these players. So they're kind of, that's great. They organise they are, because there's such great achievement. There's a kind of civic reception, and only in France they organise a duck and foie gras party. Foie gras party. This is like only in France. Surely that's kind of highly impressive. And I think people think that's going to be it, but they obviously have a final to play where they end up playing Nantes.
They do, and I try to work out an equivalent of what this would be as an English, just to kind of bring it back to the English FA Cup. And I think the best I had was it's almost like Aston Villa playing Dorking Wanderers in the FA Cup final. Or possibly, if you really want to go for a mean stretch, Chelsea versus FC Flyde. That's the equivalent of what we're talking about here. And you know what? It really is interesting because you've got these guys that at the start of the football season, and the French Cup starts in the previous season. That's how long it takes. So you've got the first few rounds start when the previous season is ending, and then when Calais get involved, they're pretty much starting from July. So they've gone right through to May, and they've got this final. And in July and August, when they're going on this little run, not knowing where it's going to lead to, their notoriety is just limited to friends and family, really, and no more than that. By the semi-final, before the final, they've become national heroes. And as you mentioned, they're getting all of this adulation and attention that you never would normally have for players and a team of this particular size. And you have to think, how does that play in their heads? How does that affect them? At what point is the notoriety more important than the actual playing? But there's nothing in the results, and even in the final, that suggests that they get carried away and lose sight of what the goal is, and that's by doing the incredible and winning this whole thing. And the emotional connection and the investment that people have put into this team as they've gone through. And I think we just love an underdog story, and it's good. And it's refreshing to see that it's not just an English thing. I think it does translate. And France definitely captured the imagination of Calais on this run. The players seem grounded, and they've gone on, and we've got our FA Cup equivalent of Chelsea versus FC Flyde. And not in a million years would you give FC Flyde. We're giving FC Flyde a big mention on this podcast, which makes no sense whatsoever in terms of how I'm trying to bring some kind of relevance to it from an English perspective. You wouldn't give them a chance, I hope, in a prayer. But even in the final, it's not straightforward.
No, absolutely. But I suppose the other thing that would happen if Chelsea played Dorking or Flyde is that once they got to the final, you'd find that lots of other people were interested in it, and all the people who'd watched Flyde all the way through then found getting tickets slightly harder, which kind of sort of happens a little bit on this. The final, they obviously the semi-final was 40,000. They had about 40,000 fans at that, and they get 19,000 tickets for the final capacity. The game is watched by 78,000, so only around half the people who went to the semi. Now, they have a capacity of 2,000. I suspect the season ticket holders were okay, so I think probably your true Calais fans, but it's as quite often happens with these stories, as it makes it to the higher entity of stuff, maybe that story starts, and it is an absolute national story. I mean, it's their messages from the president. Everything is in there. As you say, they play Nantes in the final. We were talking about Oldham last week, and that's a great story. Not quite such an upset. They're only a league below, and when they get to their final against Notts Forest, having been through so much to get there, whether it's that whether it's the players can't quite do it, or whether it's that the fates. There's always some kind of fate or luck involved in these things, and it just starts to run out. And I think we've seen it in many cases where the final game of a great cup run is very obviously a bridge too far for a team. But it's not the case. They shut up shop. They make themselves difficult to beat, and unbelievably, they take the lead. So in the final, on the 34th minute, they take the lead. It's Jerome Detriet scores. Unfortunately, I don't know his profession. I'll say candle maker to go with. We should have one of those by now. So they take the lead on the 34th minute, and they go in at halftime a goal up in the final of Coupe de France. So this is on. It is on.
They're 45 minutes away from doing the unbelievable. Anything is possible. Calais, fourth tier Calais, are 1-0 up in the French Cup final, a serious competition that's been going since 1921. And just to kind of give it a little bit of context before we kick off the second half and kind of see what happens. If we take the top five the top five European leagues, France, England, Italy, Spain, and Germany, give us some context. Right up front, a fourth tier team has never made it to a major final in the National Cup for any of these leagues. In France, they've had tier 2 teams in the finals 10 times, tier 3 teams in the final 4 times, which is incredible. Quite recently, Le Herbier, who were relegated in 17-18, lost to Paris Saint-Germain in the final, a tier 3 team. So in France, it happens, and I think it happens because of the brilliance and the romance of how this tournament is set up in terms of allowing fairy tales to blossom. To kind of contextualise that with England, England have had in the FA Cup 8 wins from tier 2 teams, but many of those date back to pre the Second World War. Only in modern times have we had tier 2 teams win the FA Cup. And it's that weird period, Graham, that we've spoken about previously. We've done Sunderland when they beat Leeds as a tier 2 team, Southampton in the 70s, and West Ham also in the 70s. That 1970s period where tier 2 teams seem to be doing exceptionally well in the FA Cup, but not since 1980 as a tier 2 team won the FA Cup, although recently we have had some tier 2 teams in the FA Cup final. In Italy, it's far less. It doesn't happen. Napoli won it in 1961-62 as a tier 2 team. But since then, tier 2 teams just don't even make the final. The Italian team hasn't made the final from the lower tiers since the early 1990s. In Germany, it doesn't happen again. I mean, you've had teams from tier 3 make the final, but there hasn't been a shock in the German Cup since around about the turn of the century. Now in Spain, it's even rarer, mainly because the way the Cup is constructed. But tier 2 teams do not make, or below, do not make the Cup final. In fact, the last time a tier 2 team in Spain made the Cup final was in 1979-80, when Real Madrid played their reserve team, Castilla, in the Cup final. Yes, Real Madrid reserves got to the Cup final and played their first team. That was a legitimate final. The rules have changed since, where that can't happen, but that actually did happen. And Castilla went on to compete in the Cup Winners' Cup the following year in 1980-81, where they played West Ham United, a second-tier team who had qualified because they'd won the FA Cup. And West Ham went on to the quarterfinals. And there was a tier 3 team in the Cup Winners' Cup quarterfinal that season in Newport County who had won the Welsh Cup. So that's a really, really long context to say, in terms of Calais, 1-0 up at half-time against Nantes, a tier 4 team. A tier 4 team had never won a major cup competition in any of the top 5 major leagues.
Can Calais pull it off? Well, frustratingly, 4 minutes into the second half, Nantes equalise. Antoine Sibieski, who I think goes on to play for Newcastle at some point, gets the goal. And that tells you already the kind of difference in these teams. And that would be a hammer blow for the side to get to 1-1. But again, they don't just fall over. they stay in it right till the end. Their hearts are broken. 4 minutes from the end of the match when Nantes get a penalty, and which they convert, and so the dream is finally over. 4 minutes from the end of the tournament, they lose the final 2-1. But it's safe to say that they have won that tournament, really, and that's actually recognised by the Nantes team and the Nantes captain himself. So actually, there's a great photo of the Nantes captain, Michael Langereau, who goes up and invites his counterpart at Calais, Reginald Brecker. I might not be pronouncing that correct. Breck, I suspect, to jointly lift the trophy. And that sort of tells you everything, I think, about Calais mania at that time. And classic nice touch there from Nantes. But it sort of says everything that whilst they couldn't quite complete the dream, it's their trophy, isn't it?
It's a beautiful touch. It really is. It is where football brings people together, and it's probably an easy thing to do for the non-captain Michael Landreau to do. But it's a really, really classy bit of action from him. And what I love is that obviously Jacques Chirac has got right behind this. I don't know if there was presidential elections going on in France at the time, but he's really behind it.
Struggling in the polls.
My cynicism is coming out. And he afterwards, obviously, he's wearing his red and gold stripes, cheering on Calais. He can afford to not be. He can afford to be partisan on this particular occasion because obviously it's captured the heart of the country, and he wants to get behind it. He goes on to say that the real winner is Calais Racing Club, which is a nice thing to say, and I'm sure that won him a few extra voters in the French presidential election.
Definitely so. So it does become an extraordinary story and achievement, as we touched on earlier. This doesn't set in motion a glorious new era for Calais, though they do amazingly reach the quarterfinal of this same competition 6 years later in 2006, which, again says something for the structure of the tournament and maybe how it is possible to reach that. Unbelievably, they get knocked out by Nantes again in the quarterfinal, which does seem... the echoes, again, you get echoes with the Oldham story, who end up playing Man United twice in their big FA Cup games. It's strange how these quirks kind of happen.
Not have a bit of form of being the small sports because, obviously they've knocked out Calais again, and so their stock is riding low. But previous as well. So we talked about at the very top of this that this tournament, the French Cup, is open to over 7,000 football teams from around the world, and teams from Tahiti will take part. That's a 16,000 kilometre trip to France, to mainland. So if you're drawn, you're a French mainland team and you're drawn away to a Tahitian team, you can combine the game with your summer holidays because you're travelling 16,000 kilometres to fulfil that fixture, or reverse for them. So in terms of the teams outside the mainland France, only on 2 occasions have teams reached the round of 32. So teams that, on these small islands, and this is the equivalent again of the English FA Cup, or teams taking part in the FA Cup from Jamaica or Fiji or Trinidad and Tobago, as an example, and reaching the 4th round proper. So, a team from Fiji gets the 4th round proper. This is the equivalent. And it's only happened twice that overseas teams have got to the 4th round equivalent, the round of 32. And in 88-89, a team from French Guiana, which is in South America, North and South America, got to the round of 32. And who knocked them out? Bloody Nantes. 11-0. Nantes have form. It just interested me as well, only because I just love this. So in the recent Coupe de France in 2019-20, a team from Reunion. Reunion is a small island just off the coast of Madagascar in the southern hemisphere. They reached the round of 32. And what I liked about that is that they had a former player, Sant Pires is the name of the team from Reunion, and they have a former player who was playing for them in 1990 called Roger Miller. So Roger Miller was playing for this team in Reunion when he became
brilliant.
incredibly famous in the 1990 World Cup. But yeah, I mean, it doesn't really add anything to the Calais story, but what it does say is that Nantes are the party poopers.
Very much so. So, the subsequent period is a bit strange for Calais. They actually move into a new ground. There are various promotions and demotions, but they actually, sadly, the club itself heads into financial challenges and is actually liquidated in 2017. So, this is, I suppose, it shows how these things are just a mini moment in time across everything. A club which has very little history over the years, and certainly not in modern day football history, and somehow reached the highest of the echelons in 1999-2000, and were within moments of taking it on, and having managed to knock out one team over in extra time. Who would have bet against them if there'd been another 30 minutes and penalties?
I mean, it's a tragic tale in the end, because obviously going into administration, which happens to many football teams, but a team that had so much kind of attention and adulation, just 17 years later is no longer in business, has gone out of business. It is a real shame. And you're right, I think they've proven along their run in the cup competition that they can go the distance in added time against the best, which they did in the semi-final against Bordeaux. So who knows if that dodgy penalty wouldn't have been awarded and Sobieski wouldn't have put it away and won the cup for Nantes 2-1. Maybe Calais would have gone into extra time and clung on and won a penalty shootout, and that would have been a real beautiful underdog story. And we'd be watching films about that football team right now. They would have gone into the Cup Winners' Cup. They may not have gone into administration. Yeah, it's a very sad what-if tale, but a beautiful story nevertheless.
So how great were them? We have 5 categories of football greatness. I have all-time greats at the top. I don't think that's going to be in any danger this week. True greats, followed by touch of greatness. And then we get down to edge of greatness and blinkered greats. I've got a pretty strong idea where this team of amateurs may appear. Jamie, where would you go?
Well, I think it's important to mark out that we do have, and we very rarely need to use it, a 6 category call. Without them, we wouldn't be where we are today, the bucket list. There's probably an argument for them not to be in that, because there's nothing unique in their story that suggests that lower league teams can advance into the latter stages of cup competitions. It does happen, albeit this is a little bit more unique because they're 4th tier. I think there's a very good argument that this is a touch of greatness, but I feel we've been here before with Hereford United. That was like, carried away with the romance, lost in the emotional investment of the story, and suddenly we're ranking Hereford United as the 3rd tier in terms of our ranking system of all-time greatness. I don't think they're touch of greatness. I don't think they're edge of greatness. I think it's a wonderful story. I love it. And it's the reason why we do this podcast, is to talk about these wonderful things in terms of greatness, because there's definitely greatness attributed and attached to this story. I mean, they're no better than tier 5, are they, really? I mean, it's a wonderful blinkered great story, or we modifying our greatness rankings again?
It just has to be blinkered greats. They would be the epitome of that. I think any other form of greatness, you would want to be seeing a climb up the leagues, a sign that there was something more to come from it. I think the only thing that would change it from blinkered greatness to an edge, or actually it would probably take it all the way to touch for me, would be if they won the cup. But however close they came and however many precedents they made, they didn't. So Calais Racing Union, blinkered greats. So that's all we have time for this week. Jamie, thank you for your insights into taking us through French football's finest upsets.
It's been a pleasure. I think the French Cup is a cup that everyone should know about. It's got a proper romance attached to it. Not only do we have teams competing from around the world, it truly is transnational. Is that a word? Transcontinental. It really is truly transcontinental. I don't think there's a football tournament in the world that has over 7,000 teams participating at the very beginning. So I think that's pretty unique in its own right. And as we've learned, the romance of a lower tier team going to the latter stages is something that you could potentially see most seasons in the French Cup. So it's a wonderful tournament, and one that I definitely will keep more of an eye on.
And a reminder, we do. It is a favourite topic of ours, the football upset and shock story. We've done quite a few of these over the course of the podcast, which you can do check if you enjoy a cup upset. Do go through our back catalogue, which you can find on either through the podcast feed or at our website, tunethewildrover.com. In there you can find, obviously we've mentioned the great Ronnie Radford Hereford story in Oldham we've talked about, which is kind of an upset story, but you'll also see Swindon, I've mentioned them in a more positive light this time, and their League Cup victory against Arsenal. We also have the great Sunderland 1973 glorious victory team there. Perhaps not so much a cup upset, but definitely an underdog story. Zaire from the 1974 World Cup, which is a truly fantastic story. So that's it from us. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please like, review us, tell your friends about us. A reminder to subscribe to us to get podcasts every Thursday, and we'll speak again soon.